Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of OpsCast brought to you by marketingops.com, powered by all the Mo pros out there. I am your host, Michael Hartman, but joining me today is Eric Westerkamp. So we're glad to have you, Eric. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks. Glad to be here.
Title of this episode is going to be something like Taming the Data Dumpster Fire. So this ought to be a fun one, and will probably resonate with most of our listeners. Just from your perspective, I think both as one of the executives you're trying to convince, as well as you're selling to CMOs and things like that. Um, like, what are you seeing as the major challenges facing CMOs and maybe the ops teams that support them in this area?
Yeah, I'd say there's two challenges. One is that the CMOs are being asked harder and harder questions to justify what are you and your team doing? I'm giving you X millions of dollars to spend on, ads and lead generation. Help me understand as a leader how that is really having an impact and affecting my business, right? And as organizations scale up bigger and bigger, there's a bigger gap between the C level in the different individual units and what they're doing. And so it's more and more incumbent upon the CMO to really be able to figure out that story and just not just justify it, but to like really show the organization that we're having this major impact and here's how. The challenge is that a lot of the other business units are very data driven.
Yeah,
Sales is actually a very data driven organization typically because it's very easy to get data on what's going on. I made so many calls. I booked so many meetings. I had so many, X, Y, and Z, and I built. And at the end of the day, I booked so much new business. Right?
yep,
Very discreet, very easy to see that.
yep,
Marketing, it's harder, but marketing is being asked by those other leaders to sort of tell the story about how their impact is grounded in data, right? And then being able to bring that back into the organization in a credible way. Now, the challenge the CMO has is that the data they get is very messy.
yeah,
Unlike sales, has very good data, very discrete data. A lot of other operation, finance, things like that, they have very good data. Marketing has huge amounts of data, but it's often very messy.
yeah,
So the second challenge is that they've been asked to tell this story. That's a challenge. And now they look at the data and information they're trying to tell a story from, and it's to some extent it's often just a mess. That's why we were talking about this like a dumpster fire. It's like here's all this
yeah.
stuff going on, and I got to extract out of that a story. Then it falls on mops often to be the one that bridge between that information and data and the CMO, and it's really their job to try to tame that and figure it out and get a story that's credible, and then teach the CMO how to really to tell that
Right,
story. There's that
right.
gap.
How to translate. It just occurred to me as you were describing this also that um, that part of the challenge for CMOs might be that because the data is a mess, it's incomplete, or it's inconsistent, for a variety of reasons, right? And there's lots of valid reasons why that could be, is that they lack the confidence that the data can be trusted to tell the story. Do you think
Yeah.
there's like something in there as well that maybe like so hard for them to go in and go like with confidence to say this is what we're doing, knowing that there's maybe one of the legs on the three-legged stool is going to collapse at any given time.
A classic example that we've seen is the CMO walks into a meeting, hopefully not a board meeting, and they say, we generated this much pipeline because that's what the reporting said.
Yeah,
Then the salesperson stands up, the leader sales says, yeah, but that's 50% more than the actual pipeline we started the quarter with or built that we showed in Salesforce. And then the CMO is sitting there kind of like, well, why is that? It's probably because of double counting. They
yeah,
had some algorithm that was building up and trying to do it. It was double counting revenue, right? And it's often really hard. So that data trust issue is, from our perspective, the core really of what you need to start to set up with these organizations
yeah.
if you want any of that reporting to be believable and for them to then be able to build those stories on top of it, right? It's super important.
So I mean, one of my beliefs is that like yeah, I agree with you. Like the trust in the data needs to be there.
Yeah.
I think if one of the things I've tried to do as a marketing ops leader, whether it's talking to marketing leaders or sales leaders or sales ops or whatever, is like lower those expectations though too. Is data
Yeah.
quality is not great, and there's a lot of reasons why. Again, some valid, some not. And I think to me, what's important is starting to do this reporting and just go like, I know that this is not. I hate to use the word right or wrong. Right? It's the data's not right, or it's or I feel maybe
Yeah.
it's you put a confidence level on it. Right? I feel 75% confident that this is valid or directionally correct, whatever phrasing you want to use.
Mhm.
But I do think it's really important to start reporting, even when you think the data is not great.
Yeah.
What do
Well,
you?
you the way I would phrase it is that yeah, if you don't start to address the data and start to try to figure out the reporting, you may not understand where you need to fix things and where you need to work on things. So starting the project of doing reporting is super important. We often find organizations that are like, hey, we want to go and do something on reporting, but we know our data is a mess.
Mm-hmm.
And so we want to go fix that first and then we'll come back. And what else, my response to that often is that almost never works
Right.
because unless you start to couple the reporting with the data fixing, like you often don't get it right because the reporting is sort of the barometer you use to understand if you're getting this stuff right. So we said instead like don't go and try to fix all your data and then come back to this because you're going
Right.
to come back in a year and your data is going to be 20% fixed and you're still going to be in the same spot. Instead, start small. Think of a set of reports or information that you can start to generate from this data that are meaningful, but they're not trying to boil the ocean, right? Let's
Yep.
start there, and then let's get the data right. Let's fix the data to support that report. It may be as simple as I'm moving my data into a data warehouse now, and I want to rebuild some accurate pipeline and opportunity reporting over here. Now, this may really duplicate what you're getting out of Dynamics or Salesforce or something like that.
Sure.
But you start there and you build that and you're like, okay, these reports look right. So now you know a few things. Now I've got some reporting that marketing can use, and often, depending on the organization, they struggle to pull their reports right out of Salesforce.
Yep.
You can do it over here in your marketing data warehouse. But you also know that the base numbers that you're working from reflect the numbers that the rest of the organization may be using as a source of truth out of Salesforce or some
Yep.
CRM. And then you start to kind of work out from there, right? Maybe you build a first touch attribution model. Again, in my opinion, first touch, they have their usage, but they're not super impactful, but they do tell you some interesting stories about
Sure.
how things are coming in. But it's easy to debug them and see if they're right.
Yeah.
And you do that before you may move to a sophisticated MTA or something like that.
Yeah. It's interesting because I'm with you. I think maybe I even shared this when we talked before. Is that I often would be asked as a marketing ops leader, like, I need dashboard for like a marketing dashboard, and I'm always
Mm-hmm.
like, do you really? Yeah, I think
Mm-hmm.
I think what you need is you need a handful of reports, because if we go spend a bunch of time building a dashboard,
Yeah.
um, it's never going to answer all the questions. I mean, I think one of the things that I find is I'm with you. Right? Do a little bit, learn from it, get that right, then go on to the next thing, and so on. The other
Yeah.
thing that I find, and I don't know if you see this too, is very often two things happen when you start to present this data, even if it's a single report.
Mm-hmm.
One is, again, especially at the beginning when maybe data is not as clean, will be there'll be some sort of outlier. And instead of people focusing on the general trend, right? They see this one thing that looks just stands out, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
above or below or off, like whatever the kind of, and then they start to question it. And if you don't have, so when I coach people, I was like, you need to be prepared for those questions if they come up, right? So, like being able to explain that the best you can is one. The second, if that's not the case, is typically we want to go, I see this, like, help me understand why they want to do a drill down kind of thing. Are you seeing those two phenomena or any others when people start doing this
Yeah.
reporting?
One of the things that when we're working with marketers is that we really try to help them understand what's going to kind of happen when they bring these reports out to the rest of the organization is that certain areas of the business, CEOs, finance, often what they're really good at because they're inundated with data and reporting. What they
Yep.
figure out how to do very quickly is look for anomalies in reporting and data because that's where they really go focus, right? So but my own team will tell you that the worst thing is I'm sitting here looking at a report going like, well, how come that number and that number don't sum to that number? Because they're supposed to.
Right.
And then the teams are like, I don't know. And you got to be prepared for that. Sometimes the answer from a marketer is as simple as like, listen, these numbers are not supposed to equal this number because they need to be able to tell that story
Yep.
and be credible about it. But they need to know that that question is going to come because the worst thing is like, well, I don't know. I got to go. We'll go look into that. But then the rest of the things you say about the report, um, are suspect because now people don't
Yeah.
trust your data.
Yeah. Your
So,
credibility
so
is
sometimes this
you,
data,
you
especially in
lose
marketing, they
credibility,
want
right?
some, and you want to call that out. These numbers are indicative and they're directional. They're not going to sum because they're coming from different locations and different data sources, and they're not meant to sum to sum to always equal the number
Right.
sitting over here in Salesforce. But here's what they do tell us, and
Yes.
boom, boom, here's the story about what this information is telling me. Yeah,
Yeah. I find it, and it used to be, and maybe this is another thing I think people could learn from. It used to really, I used to take that kind of pushback or challenge personally, right? And I think people
right.
need to realize like this is not, these questions are reasonable when people are asking
Yeah,
them. Unless, I mean, there
yeah.
are some people who are assholes, right? But in general, like they're just trying to understand. It's like that's
That's
another
really
reason.
it. Yeah, they're trying
Yeah,
to understand what's going on.
yeah. Um, it's okay. So so one of the things that I think this does, right, is this starts to expose issues. Sometimes the issue with the data is, hey, in fact, I have a number of stories where I started doing reporting, whether it was on Salesforce or
Mhm.
database or the marketing automation system, that showed there's some weirdness in the way that the sales team is operating, right?
Yeah.
And I don't want to get into details that led to reports. In this case, and the ones I'm thinking of are attribution ones mostly. And I go,
Mhm.
like, this doesn't make sense to me. But it led me to go, not question. It didn't question the data. Like, I wanted to understand why. So, are you? I mean, is that like to me again? This is like exposing this data through reporting, right? Gives you an opportunity to go fix upstream problems, whether it's, I mean, if it's
Mhm.
marketing, right? Are you always putting UTM codes on the
Yeah.
links in your ads, or do you understand when sales is
Mhm.
updating
Mhm.
opportunities, right? Things like that, and why? Are
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
do you
Yeah.
see that as something that when you're with CaliberMind, your customers, it sounds like you help them go through some of this process. Is that something you do as well?
Yeah. One of the things when we started building out our application, we were coming at it from an assumption that the customer's data was needed help, right? And I've seen a lot of other products out there in the market, and what they ask is they ask their customers to fix the data, then put it into the system, and then they'll have accurate reporting. And we decided to kind of take a different approach. I was like, listen, your data is probably going to be kind of messy. So how do we get you to good, accurate reporting when that's the case, right? So we built rules engines and data manipulation, deduplication, all this stuff right into our system so that we can actually build the rules that really help our marketers get to good reporting. And it may not be that their data is messy because of a flaw in their process or anything. Imagine a situation where you were on one map, Eloqua, and you migrated to Marketo.
Yep.
Happens all the time, or vice versa, right?
Sure.
Um, the data from Eloqua looks different, and maybe you had a different way of naming channels that just changed. You've migrated, you've matured, and you name channels different. But you now want to run reporting that looks at sort of how things have changed over time, but all these names and things have changed, right? So you
Yes.
need a way of being able to say, I'm looking at that data, but I want to map all these channels to this new naming so I can now run reporting that looks like a continuum. The data doesn't actually match this, but you want to look at this continuum of what's really like these channels have gotten better over time. But back here, we named it like this, we managed it like this, and then it's changed here and changed here. If your system can't handle that type of transformation of data, you're
Hmm.
going to end up with gaps in there. And what's going to happen is those data problems, those mismatches, are going to start to surface up into your reporting because suddenly your channels aren't going to look like a consistent level of. They're not going to be the channels you're reporting on today. Suddenly you're going to see all these other channels in your report that came from previous, and it's just going to look like a kind of a jumble of data,
Yeah, it's going to
right?
look like it's like a bunch of noise when actually, if it was uh, kind of refactored to be consistent, yeah, you would actually see
Yeah.
something more useful. Okay.
Yeah, it's a great way to put it. Like, how do you refactor on the fly, right? And so your system should be able to handle that if you want to get to some accurate level of reporting and information.
So is it? I mean, this sounds like I, don't even, I hate to call it lightweight, but a type of ETL kind of capability is that's built into CaliberMind. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, it's an ELT, right? So we
Uh,
extract, we load it, and then we transform the data on the way.
okay.
Yeah, yeah.
ELT. Okay.
So that's kind of the difference between ETL and
Yeah,
ELT.
yeah.
That we're basically taking all that raw data, putting it into our system for our customers, and then we move it through these processes to actually help refine and fix and whatever, so that now you have data where the data is kind of all stitched together in a way that you can kind of report on. But you need to have rules engines in there, right? And we take it a step further where we'll actually allow our system to take some of those rules we put in, deduplication, data normalization, things like that, and push that back out to these systems. So we'll say a
Mm,
great example is it's titles.
yeah.
We actually did an analysis where we took 1,800 titles and we threw them in and we said, how many different titles are in this batch of 1,800? And it was something like 80% of those titles were actually different. Whether it's the VP or vice president or V dot P dot, like it was just different.
Yeah.
So how do you take that and then create a segment where I want all VPs of this, right? I want all executives of this, right? And so we
Mm-hmm.
have a rules engine that actually does that inside of our system. And what we found was that, and then I could report, I could have a drop down of show me VPs of marketing. And the rules engine is extracting sort of the level and the role in the department, all
Normalizing,
this stuff,
right?
and it's
Yeah.
normalizing, right?
Yeah.
And everyone was like, can we put that back into Salesforce so that I can do my Salesforce reporting on these same things?
Yeah.
Right. And that's where a tool that's has these normalizations needs to be able to kind of potentially write this data back out to the source systems, fix doing lead to account matching, doing account deduplication, things like that.
So, do you think of that as because we taking going back a little bit, we talked about like exposing data gives the opportunity to fix it. Is this like a part of that built into the tech ecosystem by doing that? Is that kind of what you're describing then, or at least
Yeah, what we found
optionally?
was optionally, right? We found a lot of customers had a variety of tools to do this. Like, so they
Mm,
may have purchased a tool to do X fixing and this right here, but the challenge was that not everybody had it. Um, the level of maturity of using those tools was highly variable across the
sure.
customers and things like that. And so we said we really need to kind of build this into our model directly. And so that's kind of really how we approached it, which was that we needed to have that capability. And because we approached this as starting as a marketing data warehouse with things kind of built from it, our architecture lended itself to being able to create rules and do things to kind of get to this data. And then kind of after the fact, we found everybody's like, we want you to take what you've done here and send it out.
Yeah.
Like fix these other systems too. That was sort of a follow on that came after they saw what we were doing internally with all the data.
All right. This is maybe a little bit detail. When you do that pushback, do you typically overwrite what was there, or do you typically find that they say push the cleaned
Uh,
up data into another field and like
it depends. Like it depends on the customer, right? So usually what we do is we'll actually create reports that say, for instance, we're going to do lead to account matching, right?
yeah,
We'll actually create a report that says, here's all the leads and here's all the accounts that we're going to do. Validate that, like, so we'll do these steps where we actually don't actually run the final step and execute it. We kind of give them like, here's what our system thinks it's going to do, and we run through a bunch of steps to kind of validate that with
yeah,
customers, right?
okay,
And then that will, and then once it's validated, we'll actually kind of turn it on.
uh,
Other ones will actually write into like our data normalization. We actually write them into probably new fields for customers, right? So here's the CaliberMind title. Like we actually take the titles, and the first thing we do is we actually normalize them into a standardized format. Everything that says vice president or VP, like they all get. Then we run it through a process that's now extract out kind of the level of the department,
hmm
and then we'll write those into new fields potentially. Right.
yeah, yeah, okay. I mean, I know that would be my preference if I had the decision on that. Like, I don't like overriding what's there,
And
particularly if
normally for
someone.
field level stuff, we do that. But for lead to account matching and deduplication, you'd actually modify the
Yeah, yeah,
requirements.
yeah. That I mean that makes sense, right? I mean those are two different pretty significantly different things. But like I can
Yeah.
imagine with title, right? Um, either salesperson got a business card. If anybody gets that anymore, they put in the person's title that's actually what they say they are,
Yeah.
and then we go in and overwrite that into something different, and then we use that to send
Yeah. Yeah. We
a
usually, like,
personalized
that's what we
email.
typically do.
Yeah, yeah. That
Yeah.
makes sense to me. Yeah. Okay. So the rules stuff. Well, maybe we come back to that. There's a piece of this though that I still think we haven't really touched on. That I'm for longtime listeners, viewers would know. For me, like I'm a big believer that storytelling, this quest to be data driven, and you use that term for
Mhm.
some of the other teams like finance or even sales.
Yeah.
Um, I feel like many marketing teams, marketers, CMOs, that they've with their quest to be data driven, seen as data driven, that they've given up on the idea of storytelling because I think there's still a
Um,
component. I think there's a component of this. Like again, maybe it's because I believe that the data is just not going to be complete, accurate, high quality,
right.
whatever. That you need something else to stitch it together that helps bridge that, right?
Yeah.
To make it
Yeah.
believable. Like, are you seeing the same thing? And like, are you seeing it changing now? Or is there sort of a shift back to that you're seeing? Just curious.
Yeah, no, we're seeing a lot going on kind of in that space. I'll say what we saw was first, marketers really, years and years ago, didn't report on a lot of data. And then as things moved toward digital websites and things, they would start to expose a lot more of that sort of raw data. Here's how many website hits we got.
Yes. Yep.
Okay. And at one point in time, there was a relatively strong correlation between website hits and downstream leads and things. But then that correlation really kind of fell away over time. So then they said, like, okay, I got these. These now became MQLs, which are people filled out form fields and
Yeah.
things, and they would
Or you
report
use
on
lead,
that,
or their lead scoring became an MQL. If
or their lead scoring
warm
or
lead
whatever.
versus hot lead. Yeah. Okay.
And they kind of tended to gravitate towards just kind of reporting those raw numbers, right? Um, and I think what's happened, over the last X years is that the rest of the C-suite, the rest of the organization has started to believe less and less in those raw numbers and how does that impact the business, right? And that's kind of where I say the state of the business is right now.
Yeah.
And then you have compounding that more and more systems pumping in more. I'm not just using the website. I've also got outreach firing, and I've got emails going for my marketing. So more and more data, right?
Yep.
It's very easy to get lost in it. A lot of these teams brought in, to be honest, like data science, marketing analysts, people like that. Those people are really good at analyzing the data.
Yes.
And they would say, this data means boom. But that translation from the data to that what the analyst is saying to a story that the marketer, the CMO, or can tell to the rest of the organization, I'd say that's where the gap really is,
Mm. Yeah.
and it's
Okay.
hard, right? Because you can see it, like I've got a data analyst software background, but I've been in sales and marketing almost my whole career, right? And so even for me, it's really hard often to bridge the gap between the data and the story. And we've seen customers now start to really migrate to where they're really more interested in telling the story than the data because they feel that resonates better. I'll give you an example. We have a customer, and we were providing them these buyer journeys. So here's accounts that you won,
Yep.
and then we were showing them here's a buyer journey of all the things that happened for this account and why you kind of won it. They started turning that into literally they would pick out select accounts they won each quarter, and they
Hmm.
would create this graphic, an infographic of like the whole buyer journey, literally on this
Right.
like thing
It's
like
like
that. And then on
Candyland.
it, almost exactly like Candyland. And on it they would put like at this point in time, here's the roles, and they interacted with content, and then these things happen, and then these things happen, these things happen, and then they would use that and give that to sales. And sales teams would then use this as sort of a playbook. Where is my account on this pathway? Like, what have they done? What have they not done? Right.
Yeah. I love
And
that.
that made us kind of step back and think, like, well, how can I do that kind of in an automated fashion?
Right.
Right. And how do I take data and turn it into a story? And I'll be honest, that's when ChatGPT and Gemini and Claude all started to hit the market. And we realized, along with others, that those systems can't do math. Like, don't even try. Like, we've tried.
I
I'm not going to run an attribution model through Gemini
no.
anytime in the future. but can it take a buyer journey with 1,000 touch points and turn it into a credible story that a marketer can then pass to an SDR or a BDR?
Yes.
That's where it's really good. And what I'm seeing now is that these systems are helping bridge the gap between the data and the story, and
I
that's
love
where
that.
they're really powerful.
Yeah, I mean, what you just described, like I think I shared with you, like this is, and it's really where my view, because I'm like you, I'm an engineer by training, never really practiced it. So
Yeah.
my when I come into this, I think about data and I understand it sometimes too deeply, right? And it's easy to
Hmm.
go down a
Hmm.
rabbit hole. But what hit me is when, and this I had marketing ops and I had an inbound team, and I started having my inbound team track leads that were handed off because
Yeah.
I don't even really know what triggered me to do that. It's just sort of
Yeah.
intuitively like this would be a good thing to know how that resonated.
Hmm.
And it wasn't that I stopped doing reporting otherwise, but what I found was if I just watched the body language in the rooms when I presented back to sales on what we've been doing, the numbers were fine. Nobody like really I rarely got challenged on it. It was very new
Hmm.
to this particular organization thing about it. But when like I saw people leaning in, right, when we start doing the stories about we got this deal and this is what we happened and you know
Yeah.
we got it, this is what we did, we quickly got it to the right person, yada 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 yada, right? And
Yeah.
it became I realized like that piece of it was building more credibility than the raw numbers, especially when the problem with
Yeah.
the raw numbers is not the raw numbers, it's that they have no context.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah,
is it good,
exactly.
is it
Right.
bad, is it like how do we know, right?
Hmm.
What are our competitors, like the question, like what's happening with our competitors, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I went
What's
up 100% or 200%. Is that from because I went from one to two, or because I went from 1,000 to whatever? Right.
or is it a technology error, like is it a bug, right? I mean that would be the more common question I think because
Mhm.
they weren't trusting it. But yeah, I mean website visits, like I mean it's been the blessing and the curse of all this digital stuff is that you can quickly get insights,
Yeah.
but the downside is you get drowning in data and just like
Yeah.
how do you figure out which ones are important
Hmm.
and can help you like inform what you do the same or
Yeah.
different or like, that's the
Right.
part.
Right. Are you going to change tactics? That actually brings up an interesting example we just had from another one of our customers where they were seeing a shift, a drop in their organic search traffic. And they saw this because of attribution, right?
Sure.
And again, attribution plays a good role. It's not the end all be all, but it does give you indications of directionality and things and stuff that like stuff's going up, stuff's going down. And they saw this and they came back and said, well, why? They started doing investigations into that data, right? And what they found was that information that was shifting to direct search from LLMs. And so then what they wanted to know was like, what LLMs?
Yep.
And so we actually ran a report for them. That's super interesting. We actually have a report for that customer that shows what this increase in traffic coming from LLMs by LLM, right? And probably no surprise, it was primarily ChatGPT and Google for this type of company, right? And that then, so the answer is like, so I saw some change in data. I went and investigated. I found that something really had happened and we're getting a change. And then what they did is they started looking at how do I optimize content and things on my websites to help those engines
Mm-hmm.
do a better job of getting our message out. Right. So then at the end of the day, they change tactics. And then because they have good reporting, they can come back and see like, is that working? Is that increasing? Is it continuing to increase? And then by understanding which engines, they can kind of go, okay, so I really need to optimize for these two. I
Yeah,
don't really need to worry about these.
it's so interesting. I was sitting here smiling because this is not the first time I've heard somebody give that same story that
Mhm.
they've seen a drop in organic search and a pickup
Mhm.
in
Yeah.
I'll call it LLM based
Yeah.
traffic.
Yeah.
And actually earlier today I was working on something, and I have I have definitely I've not totally gone over to just using LLMs for search, but I this is a total tangent. But I have found that probably more often than not, I am using them because typically when I'm doing something where I'm going out and searching, unless it's like a pretty clear fact, kind of thing.
Yeah.
I'm typically it's like I've got a longer question to ask or I need to give it
Yeah.
more context. I'm
Yeah.
finding that I get much better results. You're right
Mhm.
though, not so good on math.
We're still, I mean, in the background, we're constantly running experiments with these systems. And what we found is that when we need the LLM to do math, what we do is we tell it what the data is and what we want the output to be like, and to write a Python program that does that and then run the program. Does that pretty
Oh,
well. So it's like, I want to do a projection, I want to do quick predictive analysis of X, Y, and Z. You can't ask it and give it the data to do that. But you can say, here's the type of data, write a program in Python that does that, and then just run the program and see the output. And that actually works pretty well.
that's really interesting. Yeah, and I've heard it does a really good job of generating code. Yeah, I don't know.
We just did a training internal here for what we all hands is on Thursdays. We just did internal training, and we actually did a training by business unit internally on how they're using LLMs in different ways. And what we found some really interesting use cases. Sales is of course using it to do research on companies and things like that before they
Yeah,
do outreach. Very very typical. But our customer success organization is doing it to write responses to customers as they come in. They're using it a lot for doing data debug. So you've got a whole managed services team,
sure.
and they'll have a customer come in and be like, "I'm seeing something weird," blah blah blah, and they'll actually have the LLM look at the data and compare it to other things and highlight anomalies, so it helps them figure out where to go faster.
Ah, okay. Yeah, that's actually really really good. It just
Mhm.
occurred to me because I somewhere along in my career I helped a company um, come up with an approach to how to enable the organization to do more customer support without growing
Yeah,
their
without growing.
staff
Yeah,
at the same rate. Was typically it was in parallel with the revenue growth,
yep,
and it came down to a methodology that involved a knowledge base and
yeah.
getting that and exposing it quickly. I can imagine that LLM would be a really good thing to put on top of something like
They're
that.
amazing tools for some of this stuff, right? Where you can we're actually building it directly into our configuration stuff, so a customer can come in and say like, how is my configuration different than standard? What have I done
Mm,
to this? How have I set up rules in your system? Because maybe I'm seeing something weird, and these systems get complicated.
sure.
How what have we done to it? What does it look like? By the way, I'm having this type of issue, and oh well, we're noticing that in this section, you're mapping your account object from this field, but it probably should be this field. And so we're seeing really
Interesting.
big usage in that area,
So
right?
exposing the butterfly effect, right? With it.
Yeah, yeah,
Interesting.
exactly. Yeah.
So I just want so this um, I think it's AI based this customer journey dream mapping stuff that's built into it, and it actually generates a visual out of the tool. Is that what it does?
We can generate a visual right out of a reporting. What we're actually doing for a lot of customers now is um, we'll go in and we'll set up a rule in our system that says like, I don't know, every time an MQL, you create a lead, right? Or every time an account gets to this level of engagement, go look at their buyer journey, right? And that buyer journey could be 10, 100, 1,000 touch points depending on
Sure.
your organization. And now figure out who the most impactful people are in there, who are the core buyers, who are the core people you're interacting with,
Right.
what are the core types of content and marketing events and things like that they've been interested in, they've done, and then give me a quick summary of the timeline of things that have happened, right? And
Mm-hmm.
we'll actually push that right into, for instance, a field right on the lead in Salesforce, so the SDR
Ah,
somebody can look at it. We're also using it to say a lot of our customers, they've got Apollo or Outreach or Sales Loft or something like that, plugged into their sales system. So all this email content is in there.
yep.
Well, so we'll be seeing all that, and we'll say, by the way, pick out like, are there any next steps that I should be aware of? You'll actually look at that stuff and say, and underneath say like, oh, by the way, they've asked for a demo. Make sure you do this. This person asked for a security review. Blah blah blah. And we actually push all that into Salesforce, or we make it available right in our app for customers.
That's awesome. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. Okay. So I don't want our listeners to walk away from this thinking that we should stop trying to be data driven or
Mm,
data informed
mm,
is the way I like to think of it.
yeah.
Um, and that like marketing shouldn't do any more reporting. Like, so like, I'm just curious, like, you know, I think marketing still should be held accountable and have metrics of some sort. Like,
Yeah, yeah,
do you have
totally.
any thoughts on, especially in your role as a CEO, like what do you look for from a marketing team, or what are you hearing your your customers and clients say, like this is what we want marketing
Yeah,
to be reporting on?
yeah. I'd say that more and more marketing is being held to a pipeline number. Now, whether it's closed won or created is different, but I'd say that things are shifting to where the organization is really holding marketing accountable for metrics that tie directly to the business that are measurable.
Okay,
Revenue is
like
one.
so
Now,
like marketing sourced versus influenced.
marketing sourced revenue. Yep,
Okay,
marketing sourced revenue or
got it.
marketing influenced, right?
Okay.
Depending on where you're looking. And so we're seeing that a lot. Now, the challenge for marketers is that may be the metric they're being held to from the organization, need to tie things to, but they really do need to look at a lot of other metrics and indicators to be able to get to influencing that number.
Right.
Right. So just knowing how much you do, but again, website hits may not be as impactful if it was, but if your website hits are dropping, you want
Yes.
to know that.
Yes.
Right, if they're going up, where are they coming from? What's my organic search volume look like? What is, so you really do need to put, I would say, you instrument your funnel, and at your different stages you're really looking at different metrics that impact that. Right, at the top of the funnel it's really, am I gaining awareness? Well, how do I know that?
Yeah.
Boom, boom, boom. Right, am I showing up on, if you're a software company, am I showing up on G2? How many website hits? How many MQLs or MQAs am I creating? Okay, what are the metrics? Usually those are more engagement metrics. That it's like, are people downloading content? Are they looking at things on the website? Are they responding to outbound emails? Are they boom, boom? So you look at those different metrics, but it's really driven by stage, to the point where the metric that you're probably going to try to tie your story to is the pipeline metric
Hmm.
for the organization.
Yeah. I mean, the way I think about it is, I'll skip the lowest level. Lowest level to me is like, is the system working as expected, right? Data
Yeah, right.
consistent,
Sure.
complete,
Yeah,
yada yada, which really doesn't go to anybody typically unless it identifies there's a sync problem with another system or something.
sure, sure.
Um, but what I think a lot of marketers miss in this goal to kind of go to the storytelling or even attribution or contribution, where they really have impact is on the day to day activities they're doing, right? So,
Yeah,
um, which they historically would have, we published X number of emails, we did a number of
mm-hmm.
blog posts, we did this many ads, and I think people have gone like, oh, that's seen as vanity metrics, but I still think there's value, and it's about
Mm-hmm.
like, to me, you brought up website visits. I agree. Like, you should be watching that. Now, do you need
Mm-hmm.
to report that to the C-suite? Probably
Nah,
not, right?
nah,
Do you need to make like use it as a barometer, like, oh, hey, there's a problem that we need to get in front of because 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, whatever it is down the road, like this could be have an impact. And if you're
yeah,
doing a marketing tactic, an email ad, maybe it's using multiple channels,
yeah,
you should be monitoring that in the early stages like a hawk to go like, is it
yeah,
working? Because if it's not,
yeah.
you need to cut it, adjust, whatever. And I see a lot of teams, they're so they're moving so fast that they're not doing that stuff on the tactical stuff because I think they've been told like it's just vanity stuff.
Yeah,
But to me, part
yeah,
of it is that who they're who the recipient of that reporting matters.
mhm,
And to me,
mhm.
like the gap is that yes, you should be doing that and you should have expectations about it. Now, again, it's like, do you share that with everybody? No. Do you need to pay
Yeah,
attention if you're the demand gen person? Absolutely.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you're the CMO, you want to know how you're probably reporting on. Here's my core channels that we work with and their efficiency, and if they're and how much and are they working, and how we're investing in these channels to increase and because usually the CMOs talks a little bit about what happened at
Yep.
the quarter and a lot about what they're doing for the next quarter. How am I going to help get to X? Well, here's the things that we're doing. Here, I got these channels and I'm making some changes. We've noticed that we're adding here, but that's a super high level report, right? You don't
Yes.
run your business off that, right?
No.
You were like, because underneath that, you're like, okay, inside this channel are all these tactics and things and stuff. And you need to know what's happening there so you can actually have an effect on that channel,
Yeah.
right?
I mean, and that's to me, like when you start getting into the attribution or contribution thing, that's where you start.
Yeah.
exposing stuff to others. But this is what I used to be a really big, huge fan of attribution, and I've really cooled
Mm,
on that. I don't think it should stop because I think it can be,
mm.
it's useful to identify what channels, what audiences, what types of tactics are most
Yeah.
effective, um, and or least effective, so that it can
Yeah.
inform how what bets you place, right?
Yeah.
I mean, to
Absolutely.
some degree, it's a bit of a,
Attribution. Yeah. It's a tactic. It tells you interesting things from the data that can really help you with your business. But as a marketer, that shouldn't be the only thing you're doing. You should have some level of engagement reporting, isn't because engagement tells you something different, and engagement can often give you signals earlier than attribution. Attribution is great, but the problem is that it's kind of a retroactive look at for you.
absolutely,
Here's how
yeah,
much, boom. But it gives you without attribution, it's hard to create that final story that goes to the CMOs because that's how you tie this stuff back to revenue.
yes,
That's
yeah,
something which you need to do.
yeah.
But prior to that, I'm kicking off all these tactics. They may not, depending on your sales cycle, they may not end up showing up in attribution for 30 days, 45, 60 days, right?
Well, I
But
have
I
an
need to
example of
know
it
it's
of
working.
a company I worked for had a deal that closed 2 years after the first interaction, which was at an event.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. But you want to know if those tactics are generating those early metrics, right?
Yeah.
Are they? I'm running an event. Did I get enough meeting? Like, did we get real meetings out of it?
Yep.
Right? And then if I have meetings, did those meetings have a follow on? And okay, now I'm seeing because if those early things are no, I'm not seeing any of that. You're never going to see it in attribution.
Right.
You want to know that early because you're like, okay, this isn't working. I want to kill this and start something else because these early metrics and get the early metrics right. Then they'll start to show up in attribution later on.
Well, I mean, just like an event's a good one, right? If the goal is to get meetings, right,
Hmm.
that should be what you're focused on. And
Yeah,
rather than say, like, attribution might come back and say, we shouldn't do that event again.
yeah,
What it may be telling you though is that the way you were present at that event was wrong. You didn't have the right people in the booth. You didn't have like, yeah, that kind of stuff. And
you
so,
didn't prep for it and have people try to set meetings before they got
yeah,
there, or whatever it was. Yeah, yeah,
yeah. So I think like that's why you need not just one, right? There's a basket of things.
yeah,
Anyway,
yeah. True.
um, okay, we've covered a ton of ground in a shorter period of time, but is there anything else that we haven't covered that we wanted to, you think we wanted to share with our audience?
No, other than I think that there's a lot of what's happening with AI is causing a huge amount of I wouldn't say concern, but confusion in the market.
Yeah,
What's real? What's not real? What can I do with it? What can't I do with it? Right. And then you also have this is almost a completely different topic, but you also have marketing teams that are running. They want to leverage these technologies. They're running smack into their own legal departments. You can't touch this stuff
yeah,
because boom, 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 right? So I say the only thing that's out there is that I'd like to say is that the AI stuff is real. It has some very strong power in certain areas. You need to make sure that you're focusing in the right areas, right? Um, and what we're seeing is that the organizations that are starting to leverage it early are starting to gain advantage
hmm,
over organizations that don't. Their teams are getting more efficient. They're getting faster. Like if I have an SDR that can cover 20% more accounts per week,
yeah,
that's an advantage, right? I
yep,
either have to spend less on SDRs or I get more out, whatever that is. And so companies really need to start thinking about that stuff now, but they also need to have a very critical eye on like can it do, where is it good, and really pick projects that really nail where it can have the most impact on the business.
yeah. I mean, I think we've got somebody potentially coming on too in the near future. We're going to be sort of talking about the difference between what is like AI, machine learning, automation. Like these are all terms that are out there, but they sort of have different
Yeah,
meanings, right? But they get
yeah,
conflated
absolutely.
a lot. So
Yeah,
I think that's,
a lot.
and I know like my own journey, like I was a relatively slow adopter, but now I'm like, I'm finding daily uses for it, in different ways. So Eric, lots of fun. If folks want to hear more about you, what you're doing, what's going on at CaliberMind, what's the way for them to do that?
Well, check out our website, www.calibermind.com.
Okay.
You can reach out to me directly. I'm on LinkedIn. I think I'm /Eric Westerkamp on LinkedIn.